Man, I can't believe I poured flour all over my knife. And the lengths that won't go through for you guys is just phenomenal. That's all part of the service that I give you and bring to you to give you quality content. And man, pouring flour on my knife, that's ridiculous. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and I've got a fantastic video for you today. Taking a complicated subject, we're going to be talking about knife steels and super steels. What is a super steel? Is it worth having a super steel? What's the difference between super steel and regular steel? And so we're going to be talking about all of that stuff and bulleting it down into a very simple format for you to understand it in all of its complexities. Because when you're talking about steels, you're really talking about science here. And so the base metal for steel is iron. This is iron ore right here. And it's abundant. We get it from the surface of the earth. It's also inside the surface of the earth, and we have trace amounts through asteroids that hit the earth. But mainly, what we do is dig it out. This iron, when you dig it out from the ground, and we're not really going to get into the different purities of iron, but when you dig this iron out, it's also got carbon in it, and that's what makes iron strong. So iron coming out of the ground typically has 4 to 5% carbon. So that's what gives iron its incredible strength. That said, that high content of carbon also makes the iron brittle. And so even though this thing's incredibly hard, it can crack fairly easy. And that's the problem with iron. So around the 16th century, right around there, they start figuring out how to make steel, and they lower the carbon content in iron to 2%, and that's basically what steel is. Steel is iron that has a carbon content of around 2%. So generally, when we think of steel, we don't consider what's really in this steel. But in the 20th century, they really started playing with these alloys. And so the steels that we grew up with are actually alloy steels. So regular carbon steel has a bunch of different alloys already in it. And, we're just not aware of that until you actually look at the composition of, say, 1095 or 1085, 1075, anything like that. So when we're talking about an alloy, that's a combination of two or more metals to make a kind of a different animal. And it's not only limited, we talk about alloy steels, but a lot of different metals are constructed of alloys. So the nickel silver in your pocket knives and shields, that's an alloy metal. And a way to think about it is like brass, right? So brass is copper, and it has zinc added to it to strengthen the copper along with another element. And that's an alloy metal. It's copper, but it's alloy metal. And so that's what an alloy is. And in these knives, just a regular knife, they might add molybdenum, manganese, nickel, chromium, vanadium, boron, silicon, and there's others. And so they're adding these alloys to achieve characteristics that will enhance the application of the steel that they're looking to make. So take, for instance, ball bearings. You want ball bearings to be very, very hard, and you also want them to be wear resistant. And so in the tool steel that they use for ball bearings, they might add a lot of manganese, which makes it hard, and they might put in vanadium and then nickel to increase its wear characteristics. And they do the same thing in knives. And so, generally not the knives that we buy with tool steel, regular carbon steel knives, are enhanced for different characteristics. That's the deal with O1 steel or A2 or D2. They're enhanced versions of 1095 that have some more alloys added to them to achieve a kind of different result. Make them stronger, make them harder, make them more wear resistant, that type of thing. And so you're talking about characteristics like strength, hardness, wear resistance, toughness. All of these can be tweaked by adding alloys to them. So there's a problem with adding alloys to metal. And the primary problem is distribution. So when you add alloys, the traditional method of adding alloys to metal was smelting. And so you boil down your iron to create the steel that you want, and then you melt down alloys into that, and that creates a whole different kind of steel, right? The problem with that is there's an insufficient distribution of those metals. And that's why sometimes if you look at old stainless steel knives, there's a big old spot here where the knife is rusting, but it's not rusting anywhere else. And that's primarily caused because in that spot, it lacked chromium. And so it has just regular steel characteristic in that spot. Other problems occur through distribution too. So you get voids and gaps. They're microscopic. You can't see them. But you get voids and gaps in this metal, and that leads to failure. And that's why knives that aren't abused, that just break through normal use, it's because of a gap or void in the metal that causes weakness that eventually leads to the blade breaking. And so that's where super steels come in. So super steels are powder metallurgy. So what they do is they, instead of just melting these alloys down, they grind them up super small. So I'm talking about smaller than powdered sugar, very, very fine crystals of these alloys like chromium or whatever the alloy might be, manganese, silicon, whatever. Very, very powdery, very small metals. And so I'm going to demonstrate to you why that works. So check this out. Okay, guys, imagine this is a modern carbon steel blade produced through the modern processes of smelting alloys into the knife. And so when you add those alloys into the knife and smelt it, after everything's said and done, this is what you're going to end up with right here. As you can see, there's gaps in this. There's some of this alloy, whether it's magnesium, chromium, whatever, in almost every place. But here it's very heavy, and here it's very light. And so that is the kind of thing you get when you smelt alloys into a metal. There's no way to ensure adequate distribution of the alloy. Okay, with particle metallurgy, you're putting these little particles precisely into the metal, and when you do that, you can completely cover the surface of the metal precisely, so that every part of that metal is covered. So when you look at this now, the whole thing's completely covered and evenly distributed on the metal. And that is the beauty of powder metallurgy. Okay, so you can see how you get a lot better coverage with powder metallurgy than you can with smelting. And all the problems that we have with steels go away. And so that's what creates the super steel. So are they different than regular steels? Absolutely. They're super steels and they have incredible properties. But not only is the steel better, guys, they can, with powder metallurgy, you can create designer steels. And so if you want, so like a knife like this is a large camp knife, 9.5 inches long. And I use this knife most of the time when I go camping. About 70% of the time I have it on me. And I use it for chopping wood, batoning, cutting branches down, camp prep, that kind of thing. And it's extremely strong and performs very well. But you can make a designer blade like this, and you could use powder metallurgy to run alloys down on the edge that'll make the edge very hard, right? So you want to have a hard edge for edge retention and wear resistance. But since you're beating the crap out of this knife, you want the knife to have some spring to it, right? So on the back of the spine of the knife, they can dial in the alloys that would make this more springy and flexible. Give it some give so it doesn't break when you're pounding on it. And inside the middle of the knife, you can also create different characteristics. So you can have a designer blade based on metallurgy, powder metallurgy. It's incredible technology. Now the question is, do you need it? Okay, so the example I just gave you is an example of why a super steel would be fantastic in this knife. So these knives that come out nowadays that have 3V, 4V, M4, all these super steels are absolutely fantastic for the application, which is a large knife that's going to take a lot of abuse, a lot of pounding. It needs to be strong and maybe even corrosion resistant. In a diving knife, they use 440A steel because incredibly 440A steel has an incredible saltwater corrosion resistance to it. So most of your diving knives have that steel in it. And it's a kind of soft steel, but you don't need it. You're not chopping down trees with it. You're just using it to pry up things from the bottom of the ocean. And usually that's pretty easy, so it works. So in a knife like this, so this is a heavy duty EDC knife slash tactical knife. And so do you really have to have a super steel in this knife? And I'll tell you, no. So this knife in D2, for instance, would last a lifetime and work just fine. Now, pardon me, this knife is not going to wear as much as a knife that was in D2 steel. And so if you're using it in an application that would cause a lot of wear, that's going to be a problem. And that's why when you look at knives, these old knives, oftentimes you see them, they have little thin blades on them. And that's because guys have used them for whittling and just worn the blade away. And so do you absolutely need a super steel in this? The answer is no. So there's advantages. I love this knife. I love this steel. I can go 3 weeks regular use EDC with this knife, and at the end of 3 weeks I can still shave hair on my arm. If you look at this blade, look at the edge close. I've cut metal straps with this knife. Didn't have anything else to do it. I just stuck my knife underneath there, pried up, and cut the metal strap. But there's no indication that it harmed the knife whatsoever. And that's the advantage of a super steel. I don't recommend doing that, but you know what? It worked, right? So that's the advantage of the super steel. The disadvantage is because the steel is so hard, you don't want to let this thing go dull. If it goes dull, you're going to spend hours, 3-4 hours trying to get an edge on this blade. The answer to that is just sharpen it every week, right? You can use this knife hard. You can take it to work and cut boxes all day long, 5 days a week. But at the end of those 5 days, just run it over a ceramics rod, and it'll in 6 runs. It'll be hair cut and sharp again. So that's the beauty of super steel. You don't need it though. What about a pocket knife? It seems like it would be absolutely ridiculous in a pocket knife. And I would say, these are light EDC knives, and you really don't need a super steel and a pocket knife, right? I can't think of an application though. So suppose whittling is your hobby, and you spend most of your time whittling. On the weekends, you spend all day whittling, and that is going to really hard on a blade. So cutting wood is one of the things that'll dull a blade pretty fast. And so if you wanted a knife that was a good whittler, then I can see the application of a super steel really helping you out. One, it's going to stay sharp longer. Two, it's going to be sharper, so you're not inclined as you're pressing down the whittle to break a blade. You're not going to break a blade, and it's not going to wear like regular steels because it maintains that edge, and you're not having to remove a lot of metal on it. And by the way, it's really hard. So I've had this knife at least 6 years, and if you look close on it, you can still see the original grind on that knife. So I've only used a ceramic stone on this, and you can still see original edge grinds on the knife. That's how hard this steel is. I've sharpened this thing repeatedly over 6 years, and it hasn't made a dent in the original grind lines of the knife. That's just incredible. And so that's an application. If you want a good whittling knife, that would make sense. So that's the deal with super steels. They are for real. They offer some really cool characteristics that could be valuable to you. The truth is, in most applications, you don't need a super steel, right? A good carbon steel blade and a hunting knife will do just fine. But if you're going to put that knife through a lot of abuse, then it makes sense. This is O1 steel. It's a tool steel. It's an upgrade over 1095. O1's a lot tougher than 1095, but this thing will corrode in a heartbeat. So that they're not very corrosion resistant at all. And a super steel and a knife like this would be fantastic, I think. It'd also be really expensive. So you just got to have to think about that yourself, what kind of characteristics you want. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope it was informative to you. If you'd like to see more content like this, go ahead and subscribe. I'd love to have you to the channel. Remember, you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And thank you for watching the channel and supporting me.